The courtroom went quiet when they read my name last. Why was I the only one left for the end? Why wouldn't my mother look at me? And why did my father already have that satisfied look on his face before the number was even said? Sadie Gray. $1. Just one. I felt something in my chest drop. Not just from the amount, but from how easily they all accepted it. No surprise, no confusion, just silence. Like this had been decided long before today. But my grandfather had looked me in the eye weeks before he died and said, "You won't be left with nothing." So what changed? As I sat there frozen, a woman I barely recognized leaned closer and whispered, "Sadie, did he ever tell you about the safe?" And suddenly that $1 didn't feel like an ending. It felt like something had been hidden. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from and what time it is where you are. I'm reading every comment. And if you've ever been told something was for the family, but never felt right about it, you'll understand why I didn't walk away that day. 3 weeks before my grandfather died, I was the one sleeping on the narrow couch in his den. Not because anyone asked me to, but because no one else would. My parents lived 15 minutes away. My brother Ethan stopped by when it was convenient, usually just long enough to be seen. But when it came to the quiet hours, the medication schedules, the late-night confusion, the moments when my grandfather would wake up disoriented and reach for someone, those belonged to me. I didn't resent it. Not at first. Growing up, my grandfather Arthur Gray had always been the one steady person in a house that ran on unspoken rules. He never raised his voice. He never played favorites in obvious ways. But he noticed things. He noticed when I got my first internship and no one asked about it. He noticed when Ethan crashed his second car and somehow still got a new one. So when his health started declining, I didn't think twice. I packed a bag, told my boss I'd be working remotely for a while, and moved into his house. The first few days were routine. Nurses came and went. I kept track of his medications in a spreadsheet, old habit from work. My grandfather slept a lot, but when he was awake, he was still himself, sharp, observant, too observant. One afternoon, I was sitting beside his bed reading through emails when he suddenly said, "Money makes people impatient." I looked up. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. He just kept staring at the ceiling like he was lining up his thoughts. "People start counting before anything's even over," he said finally. "They start deciding what they deserve." I shifted in my chair. "Are you talking about mom and dad?" A faint smile crossed his face. "I'm talking about pattern, Sadie. That was how he always did it. Never direct. Always just enough to make you think." That night, my mother Laura stopped by with groceries I hadn't asked for. "You don't have to stay here every night," she said as she set the bags on the counter. "We can arrange more professional care." "I've got it handled," I replied. She gave me a tight smile. "You always think you do." My father, Michael, came in behind her already looking irritated. "Your grandfather doesn't need to be overwhelmed with too many people hovering around him," he said. "Keep things simple." "I am keeping things simple." I said, "I'm just here." He studied me for a second longer than necessary. "Just remember," he added, "this isn't your responsibility." The way he said it didn't feel like reassurance. It felt like a warning. Later that evening, Ethan showed up. He walked straight past me into the living room like he owned the place. "How's he doing?" he asked, but he didn't wait for an answer. "Stable," I said, "tired mostly." Ethan nodded, scrolling through his phone. "Dad said, things are already being handled, so at least that's one less thing to worry about." I frowned. "What things?" He froze for a split second, then shrugged. "You know, paperwork, legal stuff." "No, I don't know," I said. He gave me a quick, dismissive smile. "It's nothing you need to stress about." Nothing I need to stress about. I'd heard that line my whole life. I didn't push further, but I didn't forget it either. 2 nights later, I was helping my grandfather sit up when he grabbed my wrist. Not hard, but firm enough to stop me. Listen carefully, he said, his voice lower than usual. I leaned closer. Okay. There are things that don't belong in the open, he said. Not when people start getting creative. My chest tightened. What are you talking about? He studied my face like he was deciding how much I could handle. There's a safe, he said finally. Not here, I blinked. A safe? He nodded slightly. Some things stay honest when they're locked away properly. I opened my mouth to ask more, but he was already pulling back, his energy fading. Grandpa, where is it? But he just closed his eyes like the conversation had never happened. The next morning, my father showed up earlier than usual. Too early. I woke up to the faint sound of drawers opening. At first, I thought it was the nurse. But when I stepped into the hallway, the house was too quiet. No voices, no movement except from the direction of my grandfather's office. The door was slightly open. I walked closer, my footsteps soft against the hardwood floor. And then I saw him. My father was standing behind the desk, flipping through a stack of papers he had no reason to be touching. His movements were quick, controlled but not careful. Like he was searching or checking. I didn't say anything right away. I just stood there watching. Then the floor creaked beneath me. He turned instantly. For a split second, something flashed across his face. Something sharp, almost defensive. Then it was gone. Couldn't sleep? He asked casually, closing the folder in his hands. I crossed my arms. What are you doing in here? He didn't hesitate, making sure everything's in order. At 6 o'clock in the morning, his expression hardened just a little. You don't need to worry about this, Suddy. There it was again. That same line, that same dismissal. I glanced at the desk. The papers were stacked too neatly now, like he'd already undone whatever he'd been doing. Dad, I said slowly. What exactly is being handled? He held my gaze for a long moment. Then he smiled. And somehow that made it worse. Things that don't concern you, he said. Behind him, the office felt different. Not messy, not disturbed, just touched. And as I stood there watching him walk past me like nothing had happened, I realized something I couldn't ignore anymore. Whatever my grandfather meant by keeping things honest, someone in this house was already trying to do the opposite. 2 weeks before my grandfather passed, my father told me to take the afternoon off. That alone should have been enough to make me suspicious. We were standing in the kitchen. I had just finished organizing my grandfather's medications for the day when my dad walked in already dressed like he had somewhere important to be. There's a meeting this afternoon, he said, pouring himself coffee without looking at me. What kind of meeting? Legal, he replied. Just some paperwork that needs to be finalized. I waited for him to say more. He didn't. Shouldn't I be there? I asked. That got his attention. He looked up slowly like I had just overstepped something invisible. No, it wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive, but it was final. I set the pill organizer down. Dad, I've been the one here every day. If this is about Grandpa, it's handled. He cut in. You don't need to involve yourself in things you don't fully understand. There it was again. That same phrase, different words, same meaning. Stay out of it. I didn't argue. Not because I agreed, but because I'd learned something over the years. Pushing too hard in that house never got you answers. It just got you shut out faster. So, I nodded like I accepted it. I'll be upstairs, I said. He gave a short nod, already done with the conversation. But I didn't go upstairs. I waited. About 20 minutes later, I heard the front door open and close. Then another set of footsteps, my mother's. They didn't linger. No conversation, just movement. I counted to 60 after the last sound faded. Then I grabbed my keys. The notary office was only 10 minutes away. I knew that because I'd driven my grandfather there once before months ago when he insisted on checking something in person. I parked across the street just far enough that my car wouldn't stand out. Through the glass windows, I could see them. My father, my mother, and my grandfather. He was sitting at a small conference table, shoulders slightly slumped, a folder open in front of him. My father stood beside him, one hand resting on the back of the chair, not touching him, but close enough to feel controlling. Across from them sat Thomas Whitaker, the family attorney. Calm, neutral, like this was just another routine signature. I stepped inside quietly. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked. "I'm just here to pick something up," I said, keeping my voice steady. She nodded and gestured toward the waiting area. I didn't sit. I stood just far enough from the conference room door to hear voices, but not so close that I'd be obvious. "It's standard," Whitaker was saying. "Everything has already been reviewed. I want to make sure it's clear," my father added. "No confusion later." My grandfather didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded, snorts, thinner than usual. "Sudhi Shadudad," my mother said quickly. There was a pause long enough to feel uncomfortable even from where I was standing. Then Whitaker again. "If you're ready, Mr. Gray, we can proceed." A chair shifted. Papers moved. And then I heard it. The soft, unmistakable sound of a pen touching paper. Something in my chest tightened. I stepped closer without thinking. Through the narrow gap in the door, I saw my grandfather signing. His hand moved slower than I'd ever seen it, careful, almost hesitant. My father leaned in slightly. "Right there," he said, pointing to a line. My grandfather paused for a fraction of a second before finishing the signature. Then he set the pen down. No one said anything for a moment. It should have felt official, clean. Instead, it felt rushed, controlled, like something had just been decided that no one wanted questioned. I stepped back before anyone could see me. By the time they came out, I was sitting in the waiting area, scrolling through my phone like I'd been there the whole time. My mother smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you're here. Just stopped by," I said casually. "Everything okay?" "Of course," my father answered before she could. "Just routine." "Routine." My grandfather looked at me. Really looked. And for a second, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not confusion, not weakness, awareness, like he knew exactly what had just happened and exactly who had been kept out of it. "Sudhi," he said softly. I stood up. "Yeah." He reached for my hand. His grip was weaker than before, but still deliberate. And then without looking at my parents, he pressed something small into my palm. "Keep this," he said under his breath. I glanced down a folded piece of paper. "Grandpa," but he was already pulling his hand back, his expression smoothing out like nothing had happened. My father was watching now, too closely. "Let's go," he said, already turning toward the exit. The ride home was quiet. No one mentioned the meeting. No one explained what had just been signed, and I didn't ask. Not yet. I waited until that night, until the house was quiet again, until I was back on the couch in the den with only the soft hum of the lamp and the steady rhythm of my grandfather's breathing down the hall. Then I unfolded the paper. Inside was a short string of numbers, 6 digits, and underneath it written in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting, B2. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't understand what it could mean, but because I did. A bank, a vault, a safety deposit box, something not kept in the open, something not part of what I had just watched being signed. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my pocket. And for the first time since that meeting, one thought settled in clearly. Whatever had happened in that room, it wasn't the whole story. I didn't go to the bank right away. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I waited 3 days after the will reading long enough for the initial tension to settle long enough for my parents to assume I had accepted what happened. I didn't argue with them. I didn't ask questions. I just went quiet. That was new for them and useful for me. On the 4th morning, I drove to the bank listed on the small print of one of my grandfather's old account statements. It was a local branch. Nothing flashy. The kind of place that hadn't changed its interior since the early 2000s. Neutral colors, quiet voices, no one paying attention to anyone else. Exactly what I needed. I walked up to the counter and gave my name. Sati Gray, I said. I'm here about a safety deposit box under Arthur Gray. The woman behind the counter typed something into her system. Her expression stayed polite, but I noticed the slight pause. There is a box under that name, she said. Do you have authorization documentation? I believe I'm listed as a secondary. I replied, keeping my tone steady. Another pause. More typing. Then she frowned. You are listed, she said slowly. But there's something unusual here. My chest tightened. What do you mean? She turned the monitor slightly, not enough for me to read it, but enough to show me she wasn't imagining it. There's an authorization form adding you as a co-access holder, she explained. But the timestamp shows it was processed after the primary account holder's health decline was documented. I kept my face neutral. That's a problem. It can be, she said carefully, especially if the signature doesn't match prior records. There it was. Can I see the signature? I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. Give me a moment. While she stepped away, I took a slow breath. My grandfather had trusted systems. Snorts, he trusted documentation. He trusted structure. If something had been changed, it wouldn't be clean. It wouldn't be perfect. And sure enough, when she came back with a printed copy, I saw it immediately. My name was there, Sadie Gray. But the signature beneath it, the one that was supposed to be mine, was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, just off. The curve of the S was tighter than how I wrote it. The G in Gray looped in a way I'd never used. Small details. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for them. But I was. That's not my signature, I said. The woman nodded like she'd expected that answer. I thought you might say that. I looked up. So, what does that mean? Clear's throat. It means, she said carefully, that someone may have attempted to establish your access without your direct involvement. Why would they do that? She didn't answer right away. Because she didn't need to. We both knew control. If my name was on the box, they could later argue I had access all along. If something went missing, if something was changed, it could be traced back to me just as easily as anyone else. It wasn't just about hiding something. It was about protecting themselves. Is the box still active? I asked. Yes, she said. No recorded closure. No recent access logs either. That stopped me. No one's opened it. Not according to the system, she replied, which meant one of two things. Either whatever was inside hadn't been touched, or someone had been careful enough to avoid leaving a trace. Can I access it now? I asked. She shook her head slightly. Not yet. With the signature discrepancy, we'll need additional verification. Possibly legal confirmation. Of course. Nothing was going to be simple. Who else has access? I asked. She checked again. Primary account holder Arthur Gray. Secondary Sati Gray. No one else. No. I nodded slowly. That was interesting because if my father had been involved in changing documents, he hadn't added himself directly. He'd used me instead, which meant he either didn't trust the system or he didn't want his name anywhere near it. Is there anyone I can speak to about resolving this? I asked. She handed me a card. Our legal liaison. But you may want to consult your own attorney as well. I took the card. Evelyn Brooks, the same name from the courtroom. That wasn't a coincidence. Thank you, I said. As I turned to leave, she added, Miss Gray. I looked back. Whatever is in that box, she said, her tone quieter now. It was important enough for your grandfather to protect it twice. Twice. Once with the box. And once by trying to make sure I could reach it. I walked out of the bank with the card in my hand and a clear understanding settling in. This wasn't just about a will. This was about something that had been prepared and then interfered with. Something my grandfather didn't trust to stay in the open. I got into my car and sat there for a moment staring at the name on the card. Evelyn Brooks, the same woman who had leaned toward me in that courtroom. The same one who had asked about the safe. I hadn't called her yet. I wasn't even sure what I was walking into. But I knew one thing now with absolute certainty. Someone had tried to rewrite what my grandfather left behind. And they'd done it carefully enough to look legitimate, but not carefully enough to fool me. I started the engine, and as I pulled out of the parking lot, one thought stayed steady in my mind. If the truth was locked inside that box, then whatever my parents had planned was about to fall apart. Evelyn Brooks didn't waste time on small talk. Her office sat on the third floor of a quiet brick building downtown. Nothing flashy, but deliberate, organized, controlled. The kind of space that told you the person inside didn't miss details. That alone made me trust her more than anyone I'd dealt with so far. She gestured for me to sit, then closed the door behind us. I'm glad you came in, she said. I was hoping you would. You knew something was off, I replied. She gave a slight nod. I suspected it. I didn't have enough to act on it until now. I handed her the printed copy of the bank authorization form. She studied it for less than 10 seconds before setting it down. That's not your signature, she said. I know, and it's not your grandfather's usual pattern for authorizing access either, she added. He was very particular about documentation. I leaned forward. So, what does that mean legally? It means, she said, folding her hands together. Someone attempted to create a paper trail that gives the appearance of legitimacy without actually following proper procedure. In plain English, she met my eyes. They tried to make it look like you were involved so they wouldn't be the only ones responsible. That landed harder than I expected. Not just manipulation, preemptive protection. They were covering themselves, I said. Yes, she replied. And possibly setting you up as a fallback explanation if anything was questioned later. I sat back in the chair, letting that sink in. All those times my father said, you don't need to worry about this. He wasn't protecting me. He was keeping me out while quietly placing me inside the paperwork. Anyway, the one they read in court. Evelyn reached into a folder on her desk and pulled out a copy. I requested this the day of the hearing, she said. Your grandfather had me review earlier drafts months ago. This version, she tapped the page lightly. Doesn't match the intent he expressed to me. How different, she slid the paper toward me. I scanned it quickly. Structured, clean, legally sound. And completely wrong. I get $1, I said flatly. And the majority of the estate passes through your parents, she confirmed. That's not what he wanted, I said. No, she agreed. It isn't. I looked up. Can you prove that? Not with this alone, she said. But there's something else. She opened another folder. Inside was a single-page document, more like a log entry than a full legal file. Your grandfather requested a supplemental will draft 5 days before his passing. She said it was prepared but never formally filed. My pulse picked up. Where is it? That's the question. She replied. Because according to procedure, if it wasn't filed, it shouldn't exist. But you think it does? She gave a small, almost knowing smile. Your grandfather didn't do anything halfway. If he had something important to say, he made sure it could be found. I reached into my pocket and placed the folded paper with the numbers on her desk. I think he already did. She unfolded it carefully. 6 digits. B2. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Safety deposit box, she said immediately. That's what I thought. She nodded once. And if your grandfather followed his usual pattern, that's where he would have stored anything he didn't trust to remain untouched. Like a second will. Exactly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she leaned back in her chair. Let's assume there is a second will, she said. And let's assume it reflects his actual intent. That changes everything. How I asked it gives us grounds to challenge the probated will, she explained. Especially if we can show the original was executed under questionable circumstances, timing pressure, or diminished capacity. I thought about the notary office, the way my father stood over him, the hesitation in my grandfather's hand. He wasn't himself that day, I said quietly. Evelyn nodded. That matters. But we still need proof, I added. Yes, she said. And right now, that proof is potentially sitting in a locked box you don't officially have access to. I let out a slow breath. So, what do we do? She didn't hesitate. We make it official. How? We file a request to verify your access rights to the box, she said. Using the discrepancy in the signature as grounds. That forces the bank to allow supervised entry under legal review. And if something's in there, then we document everything immediately, she replied. Chain of custody timestamps witnesses. No room for dispute. I nodded slowly. For the first time since the will reading this didn't feel like confusion. It felt like a direction. What if there's nothing in there? I asked. Evelyn held my gaze. Then we reassess, she said. But based on everything you've told me, I don't think your grandfather left this unfinished. I wanted to believe that more than I was comfortable admitting. She gathered the papers and placed them back into the folder. I'll file the request today, she said. We should have clearance within 48 hours. And my parents, I asked. They'll be notified eventually, she said, but not before we move first. Good, because I wasn't ready for another conversation where they acted like none of this mattered. As I stood to leave, Evelyn added Sati. I paused. Whatever is in that box, she said, her tone steady. It was important enough for someone to try to hide it and careful enough to make it look like nothing was wrong. I nodded. I've spent my whole life being told not to worry about things, I said. Turns out that was the first thing I should have questioned. She gave a faint smile. That usually is. I left her office with something I hadn't had since the courtroom. Not certainty, but structure, a process, a way forward that didn't depend on emotion or confrontation, just evidence. And as I got back into my car when thoughts settled in clearly, if my grandfather had gone through the trouble of creating something they couldn't control, then whatever was inside that safe wasn't just a backup plan. It was the truth. They couldn't rewrite. And in less than 2 days, I was going to see it for myself. 48 hours felt longer than the entire week after the will reading. Not because nothing was happening, but because everything suddenly mattered. Every hour gave my parents more time to realize what I was doing. Every delay meant more chances for something to go wrong, to be moved, to disappear. Evelyn handled most of the process. She filed the request, cited the signature discrepancy, and pushed for supervised access under legal review. It was clean, precise, which was exactly why it worked. By Friday morning, I was standing inside the bank again, this time, not at the front counter, but in a restricted hallway behind it. Neutral walls, low lighting, no windows, just a narrow corridor leading to a reinforced door. The safety. Deposit vault. A bank employee stood beside us holding a clipboard. Evelyn was next to me, composed as ever, her expression giving nothing away. You'll both be present during the opening, the employee explained. No items can be removed without documentation. Everything will be recorded. Evelyn nodded. Understood. I didn't trust myself to speak. The employee unlocked the main vault door with a key, then entered a code. There was a low mechanical click followed by the slow, heavy shift of metal. The door opened. Inside rows of metal boxes lined the walls, each one identical. Each one holding something someone didn't trust to leave out in the open. We stepped inside. The employee guided us to a row near the back. Box B2, she said, checking her list. My chest tightened. B2, the exact marking from my grandfather's note. She inserted a key into the lock, then stepped aside. I'll leave you with this, she said. Knock when you're finished. The door closed behind her, and suddenly it was just me and Evelyn and the box. Evelyn looked at me. You ready? No. But I nodded anyway. She turned the key. There was a soft click. Then she pulled the metal drawer outward, placing it carefully on the small table in the center of the room. For a second, neither of us moved. All the questions, all the doubt, all the waiting. It was all sitting right there. Go ahead, she said quietly. I stepped forward. My hands didn't shake, but they didn't feel steady either. I lifted the lid. Inside, there wasn't much. No stacks of cash, no jewelry, just a single large envelope, thick, sealed, snorts, intentional. Across the front, written in my grandfather's handwriting. For Sadie Gray only. My throat tightened, he knew I said under my breath. Evelyn didn't respond. She didn't need to. I picked up the envelope. It had weight not just physical, but deliberate, like everything inside it had been chosen carefully. Open it, Evelyn said. I broke the seal slowly. Inside there were several documents. The first one I pulled out looked exactly like what I expected and nothing like what I'd been given in court. A will, but not the one they read. This one was dated 5 days before my grandfather died. My eyes moved quickly across the page. Clear language, no ambiguity. The majority of the estate, his properties, investments, accounts, was assigned to me. Not my parents. Not Ethan. Me. I exhaled sharply like my body had been holding that breath for days. This is it, I said. Evelyn stepped closer, scanning the document. It's properly structured, she said. Witness lines, signatures, dates. She paused, then looked at me. This is valid. I felt something shift inside me. Not relief. Not yet. Something steadier than that. Confirmation. They knew, I said. Evelyn didn't disagree. I set the will down carefully and reached for the next document. This one wasn't legal. It was personal. A letter folded once. My name written across the top. I hesitated for a second before opening it. Suddy, if you're reading this, it means things didn't go the way I intended them to on the surface. I felt my chest tighten as I continued. There are decisions being made around me that I do not fully agree with, but I am not in a position to fight them directly without causing more harm than good. So, I prepared something separate, something honest, something I knew they wouldn't be able to change. I had to stop for a second. Evelyn didn't interrupt. I kept reading. You've always been the one who sees what others overlook. The one who waits, who listens, who doesn't rush to take what isn't clearly yours. That matters because what's been done here isn't just about money. It's about control. My grip tightened slightly on the paper. If they've tried to convince you to walk away or to accept less than what you know is right, don't. Not because of the assets, but because of what it represents. Truth shouldn't be rewritten just because it's inconvenient. I swallowed hard. He knew. He had known exactly what they might do, and he had planned for it. I lowered the letter slowly. Evelyn watched my expression carefully. "There's more, isn't there?" I nodded and flipped through the remaining contents. There was a final document, smaller, simpler. A printed transcript. "What is this?" I asked. Evelyn leaned in slightly. "Play it," she said, pointing to a small USB drive clipped to the page. There was a recording. Of course, there was. My grandfather hadn't just written things down. He had documented them. I stared at the USB for a moment. "This changes everything," Evelyn said quietly. I nodded. But it wasn't just that. It wasn't just about winning. It was about understanding something I hadn't fully admitted to myself before. My grandfather hadn't been confused. He hadn't been passive. He had been careful. Careful enough to create something they couldn't control. Careful enough to leave it somewhere they couldn't reach. And careful enough to make sure I would find it. I placed the documents back into the envelope. My movement slower now, more deliberate. Because this wasn't just evidence anymore. It was intention. And as I looked at that envelope one more time, one thought settled in clear and unshakable. Whatever my parents thought they had secured was about to be taken apart piece by piece. I didn't go home right away. Not after what I had just seen. Evelyn insisted on making copies of everything, scanning each page, documenting timestamps, logging the contents in front of the bank officer who returned to witness the process. It was slow, methodical, and necessary. "No surprises later," she said as she sealed the evidence envelope. "We control the narrative now." Control. That word sat differently with me now. By the time I got back into my car, the sun was already low. My phone had 3 missed calls from my mother and 1 from Ethan. No voicemail, of course not. They didn't want to leave a record. I stared at the screen for a moment, then put the phone face down on the passenger seat. They could wait. I needed to think, but thinking didn't last long, because an hour later, I was pulling into the driveway of the house I had grown up in, the same house where everything had been handled without me. The lights were on, all of them. That was new. They were expecting me. I stepped inside without knocking. My mother was in the kitchen, arms crossed, her posture, already tight. My father stood near the dining table, not sitting, just waiting. Ethan leaned against the wall, his expression somewhere between curious and uneasy. No one spoke first, so I did. "I went to the bank today," my mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "Sati." I opened the safety deposit box. That stopped her. My father didn't move, but something in his face shifted just slightly. Not shock, calculation. "You had no right to do that," he said evenly. I let that hang for a second. Then I reached into my bag and placed the envelope on the table. I think I did. No one touched it. Ethan straightened a little, his attention sharpening. "What is that?" he asked. "You already know what it is," I said, looking directly at my father. My mother stepped forward. "Sati, you're making assumptions." "No." I cut in my voice, calm but firm. "I'm done making assumptions." I opened the envelope and pulled out the second wheel, placing it flat on the table between us. My father's eyes flicked down just for a second, but it was enough. "This is dated 5 days before Grandpa died," I said. "Signed, witnessed, structured correctly." My mother didn't look at it. "That doesn't mean it's valid." "It does," I said. "Legally and structurally, it holds up." Evelyn already reviewed it. At the mention of her name, my father's jaw tightened. "Of course, she did," he muttered. Ethan pushed off the wall and stepped closer. "Wait, what does it say?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I slid the document slightly toward him. He read faster than I expected, and when he finished, he looked up confused. This says everything goes to you. Yes, that's not what we were told, he said, glancing between our parents. No, I replied. It isn't. Silence filled the room. Heavy, thick. My mother finally looked down at the paper. Like avoiding it had stopped working. That's not the version your grandfather finalized, she said carefully. It is, I said. It just wasn't the version you presented. My father let out a slow breath. Suddy, you don't understand how these things work. I almost smiled. That's interesting, I said. Because I understand enough to know that altering documentation, especially under questionable conditions, is a problem. His expression hardened. No one altered anything. I reached back into the envelope and pulled out the bank authorization form. The signature on this isn't mine, I said, placing it next to the will. And according to the bank, it was processed after Grandpa's condition declined. My mother's eyes flicked to it, then away. That's administrative, she said. Mistakes happen. Not like this, I replied. Ethan looked at the form, then at me. You're saying someone forged your signature. I'm saying someone tried to make it look like I was involved, I said. Another silence, longer this time. Then my father spoke again, quieter now. We were trying to keep things stable, he said. Your grandfather was not in a position to make clear decisions toward the end. I held his gaze. He was clear enough to prepare a second will. I said that document wasn't filed. My mother snapped. That matters. It matters. I agreed. But not the way you think. I pulled out the letter next. I didn't hand it to them. I just held it. He knew, I said. He knew decisions were being made around him that he didn't agree with. My father's eyes narrowed. You're interpreting. I'm reading. I corrected. There's a difference. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Why wouldn't he just say something? He did, I said. You just weren't the one he trusted to hear it. That hit. I saw it land. Not just on my father, but on Ethan, too. My mother's voice softened, but it felt strategic. Suddy, families make decisions together. Sometimes that means adjusting things for the bigger picture. The bigger picture, I repeated. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, what part of the bigger picture includes giving me $1? No one answered because there wasn't a version of that question that sounded reasonable out loud. My father finally stepped forward, placing both hands on the table. You've always been independent, he said. You have a career, stability. You don't need this the way don't I said, cutting him off. My voice didn't rise. But it didn't need to. Don't turn this into a justification. I said this isn't about what I need. It's about what was decided and how. Ethan looked at him now. Dad, did you know about this? He asked, gesturing to the second will. My father didn't answer immediately. And that was the answer. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. So, you did. It's more complicated than that, my mother said quickly. It's actually not, I replied. I reached into the envelope one last time and pulled out the USB drive. This, I said, holding it up slightly, is a recording Grandpa made. That got their attention. All of it. What's on it? My father asked. I met his eyes. Something that confirms exactly what he intended, I said. In his own words, no one spoke. Because now it wasn't just documents. It wasn't just interpretation. It was him unfiltered. And as I set the USB down next to everything else, I felt something shift completely. Not in the room, in me. I wasn't reacting anymore. I wasn't trying to be included. I wasn't waiting for explanations. I had everything I needed. And for the first time since this started, I said something that didn't come from frustration, but from certainty. I'm filing a formal challenge, I said. Everything goes through legal review from here. My mother's face tightened. Suddy, that's not necessary. It is, I said. My father straightened, his voice colder now. If you do that, you're taking this outside the family. I looked at him for a long second. Then I said, it already left the family when you decided I didn't deserve the truth. That landed harder than anything else I'd said. No one followed me when I picked up my bag. No one tried to stop me because there was nothing left to argue. Not without exposing more than they were willing to admit. As I stepped outside, the air felt different, clearer. Not because things were resolved, but because they were finally defined. And as I walked to my car, one thought stayed steady in my mind. Whatever they thought they had protected was about to be examined in a place where control didn't come from silence, but from evidence. Filing the challenge wasn't dramatic. No raised voices, no slammed doors, just paperwork. Evelyn had everything prepared within 24 hours. A formal petition to contest the probated will supported by documentation. The second will the signature analysis request the bank discrepancy and a preliminary affidavit outlining the timeline. Clean, structured, difficult to dismiss. This isn't about proving everything at once, she told me as we reviewed the documents in her office. It's about creating enough pressure that the court requires a full examination. And once that happens, I asked. They have to respond. She said under oath. That was the part that mattered, not what my parents said in the kitchen, what they would say when it was recorded. The petition was filed by the end of the day. By the next morning, my phone rang. I already knew who it was before I looked. My father. I let it ring twice before answering. Suddy. His voice was controlled. Too controlled. You filed something, he said. I did. A pause. You should have come to us first. I almost laughed. I did. I said, you just didn't answer. Another pause. Longer this time. You're escalating this unnecessarily, he said. This can still be handled privately. Handled, I repeated. There it was again. That word they used whenever something needed to disappear quietly. It's already being handled, I said. Just not the way you expected. His tone shifted just slightly, less patient, more direct. You don't understand what you're putting at risk, he said. I understand exactly what I'm doing, I replied. Do you? He pressed. Because once this goes to court, everything becomes public. Every decision, every detail that affects all of us. That was the first honest thing he'd said. Not concern, exposure. That's not my responsibility to manage. I said, it is if you're part of this family. I didn't respond right away. Then I said, am I silence, heavy, immediate? Because that was the real question, wasn't it? If I was only part of the family when it was convenient, when decisions didn't involve me, when outcomes didn't include me, then what exactly was I protecting? I'm not doing this to hurt anyone, I said finally. I'm doing this because something was changed. And I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. His voice lowered. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. No, I said, I'm making it visible. That ended the call, not with an argument, with a boundary. The response from their attorney came 2 days later. Predictable. They challenged the validity of the second will. Claimed it was unverified, unfiled, and potentially created under unclear conditions. They also introduced something new. A statement signed by my father. I read it twice, then a third time. It says your grandfather lacked consistent mental clarity in his final days, Evelyn said, watching my reaction. He didn't, I said immediately. I know, she replied. But they're building a narrative. A clean one. Simple. If he wasn't fully aware, then anything created late in his life could be questioned, including the second will. And the first one I asked, she gave a small, tight smile. They'll argue that one was created under supervision, structured, controlled. Of course, I leaned back in the chair, thinking. They're not denying the second will exists, I said slowly. No, Evelyn agreed. They're reframing it, making it look unreliable, which meant we didn't just need to prove it existed. We needed to prove he was fully aware when he created it. I looked at the USB drive sitting on the desk between us. We have that, I said. Evelyn nodded once. If it says what you think it says. I picked it up, turning it slightly in my hand. I haven't listened to it yet, I admitted. She didn't seem surprised. Sometimes she said it's easier to act before you fully hear something. Yeah, I said quietly. It is, but now we didn't have that option anymore. She plugged the USB into her laptop. The screen lit up. One file, no label beyond a timestamp. She clicked it. For a second, there was nothing but static. Then my grandfather's voice, clear, steady, stronger than I'd heard it in weeks. If you're hearing this, it means someone has tried to simplify something that shouldn't be simplified. I froze. Evelyn didn't move. My name is Arthur Gray, he continued. And I am fully aware of what I am doing at the time of this recording. I felt my chest tighten. That alone changed everything. I've been advised on how my estate should be structured, he said. But I do not agree with the direction it is being pushed. A pause, not confusion. Deliberate. I am not being forced, he added. But I am being guided repeatedly. Evelyn glanced at me. We both knew what that meant. My intention is simple, he said. I want my assets to go to the person who has been present consistent. Not because she expects something, but because she hasn't asked for anything. My grip tightened around the edge of the desk. Sadie, he said, just my name, nothing else. But it landed harder than anything. I trust her judgment, he continued. And I trust her to understand that this is not about reward. It's about responsibility. There was another pause. Then, if this recording is needed, it means the written word was not enough. The file ended. Silence filled the room again, not uncertain this time. Final. Evelyn closed the laptop slowly. Well, she said, her voice calm but firm, that addresses their entire argument. I nodded because it did more than that. It didn't just confirm the will. It confirmed intent, clarity, awareness, everything they were trying to question. They can't argue diminished capacity with that, I said. No, she replied. They can't. I sat there for a moment, letting it settle. All of it, the documents, the letter, the recording. It wasn't scattered anymore. It was aligned, deliberate, built to withstand exactly this kind of challenge. He knew they'd do this, I said. Evelyn nodded. He prepared for it. I let out a slow breath, not relief, something quieter, more grounded, because now it wasn't about uncovering the truth. That part was done. Now it was about presenting it. And as I looked at the closed laptop, one thought settled in, steady and unavoidable. The version of the story they built was about to be replaced by the one they couldn't control. The hearing wasn't scheduled for drama. It was scheduled for clarity. That's what Evelyn told me as we walked into the courthouse that morning. No raised expectations, no promises about outcomes, just a process designed to test what holds up under scrutiny. But the moment I stepped into that room and saw my parents already seated across from us, I knew clarity wasn't going to come easily. My mother sat upright, composed in a way that looked practiced. My father leaned slightly forward. Hands clasped, his expression neutral but alert. Ethan sat beside them, quieter than I'd ever seen him, his gaze shifting between us like he didn't know where to land. Their attorney stood when we entered, confident, prepared, just like Evelyn. This wasn't a family discussion anymore. This was two structured narratives about to collide. We took our seats. The judge entered a few minutes later, reviewed the filings briefly, and got straight to the point. This is a petition to contest a probated will based on newly presented evidence. She said, we will focus on the validity of the competing document and the circumstances under which both were created. No room for interpretation, just facts. Their attorney went first. He moved smoothly through his argument, measured tone-controlled pacing. The document presented by Ms. Gray, he began, was never formally filed. Lacks independent verification at the time of creation and appears under circumstances that raise legitimate questions about its authenticity. He didn't mention me directly again, just the document, detached, strategic, he continued. Additionally, we have reason to believe that Mr. Arthur Gay's mental clarity in his final days was inconsistent, making any latest revisions unreliable. There it was. Their entire case. Simplify the narrative, question the timing, undermine the person who made the decision. I didn't react. I didn't need to because we weren't responding to emotion. We were responding to structure. Evelyn stood when it was her turn. No theatrics, no urgency, just control. Your Honor, she said, the opposing counsel has framed this matter as a question of reliability. We agree. That is exactly what this is. She paused briefly, letting that land. So, we will focus on what is verifiable. She placed a copy of the second will on the table. This document is properly structured, witnessed, and dated. It was created within a legally acceptable time frame prior to Mr. Gay's passing. She slid another document forward. We also have evidence that access to a safety deposit box associated with Mr. Gray was modified under questionable circumstances, specifically a forged signature attributed to my client. The judge glanced at the document, then back at Evelyn. And your position, she asked. That the probated will was executed under influence and control, while this document represents Mr. Gay's independent intent. Clear, direct, no extra language. Then came the shift. The court has also been provided with an audio recording. Evelyn continued. We request permission to present a relevant excerpt. Their attorney stood immediately. Objection. The origin and timing of that recording have not been independently verified. Evelyn didn't raise her voice, which is precisely why it should be examined, she said. The judge considered that for a moment, then nodded. Proceed. The room felt smaller as the audio device was placed on the table. Evelyn pressed play. Static. Then my grandfather's voice. This is Arthur Gray. I am fully aware of what I am doing at the time of this recording. No hesitation, no confusion, just clarity. I didn't look at my parents. I didn't need to. I could feel the shift. The recording continued. I've been advised on how my estate should be structured, but I do not agree with the direction it is being pushed. A pause. I am not being forced, but I am being guided. Repeatedly. That word again, guided, careful, measured, enough to imply pressure without exaggeration. The judge leaned slightly forward. Their attorney didn't interrupt this time because there was nothing to interrupt. My intention is simple, my grandfather said. I want my assets to go to the person who has been present. Consistent. Another pause. Then Sati, just my name, but it changed everything. The recording ended. Silence followed. Not uncertain, not confused, defined. The judge turned her attention back to their side of the room. Counsel, she said, would you like to respond to the content of that recording? Their attorney stood, but his tone had shifted. This recording, while clear in isolation, does not necessarily reflect. Does it indicate diminished capacity? The judge interrupted. A pause. No, Your Honor. Does it suggest coercion? No. Then what specifically is your challenge to its validity? Another pause. Longer this time. Because the framework they built was no longer holding. It raises questions about context, he said finally. The judge nodded slightly. Context is important, she agreed, but so is clarity. And this recording provides a direct statement of intent from the D-dent under conditions that appear coherent and self-aware. She turned to Evelyn. Anything further? Evelyn shook her head. No, Your Honor. The judge looked down at the documents one more time, then back up. The court finds that there is sufficient cause to recognize the existence of a competing will supported by credible evidence, she said. Given the documentation and the audio record, the probated will is hereby set aside pending full enforcement of the later instrument. I didn't react immediately. I just sat there letting the words settle. Set aside. That was the shift. Not final resolution yet, but control moving away from assumption toward verification. The judge continued. Further proceedings will finalize asset distribution in accordance with the second while barring any additional evidence. There wouldn't be any. We both knew that. The hearing ended without anything dramatic. No outbursts, no confrontation, just a decision. Clean, structured, unavoidable. As people began to stand, I finally looked across the room. My mother avoided my eyes. My father didn't. But whatever he had prepared to say, whatever argument he thought might still exist, was gone. Not defeated, just irrelevant. Ethan looked at me once like he wanted to say something. He didn't because there wasn't a version of this where words fixed what had already been done. I gathered my things slowly. Evelyn placed a hand lightly on the folder in front of me. It's not over, she said quietly. But it's decided, I nodded. Because that was the difference. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about something being restored to what it was always supposed to be. And as I walked out of that courtroom, one thought stayed steady in my mind. They didn't lose because I fought harder. They lost because the truth had been there the entire time. The final order came through 3 weeks later. No ceremony, no courtroom this time. Just a document delivered to Evelyn's office, stamped, signed, and definitive. The court recognizes the second will as the controlling instrument, she read aloud, sliding the paper toward me. Asset distribution will proceed accordingly. That was it. No dramatic language. No acknowledgement of everything it took to get there. Just a correction. Clean, official, final. Snorts, I sat there for a moment staring at the page. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I did. Everything my parents had tried to handle quietly had now been rewritten in a place where they couldn't influence it. What happens next? I asked. Execution, Evelyn said. Accounts transfer, property titles update. It'll take time, but it's straightforward from here. Straightforward? That word felt strange after everything. I nodded slowly. Okay. She watched me for a second. You expected it to feel different. I thought about that. I expected something, I admitted. Relief, maybe. And I exhaled quietly. It's quieter than that. Not empty. Just settled. Like something that had been out of place for a long time had finally been put back where it belonged. I didn't hear from my parents for a while after that. Not immediately, not once the order came through, which honestly made sense. There wasn't much left to argue. A week later, my phone buzzed while I was at work. A message from my mother. We should talk. No apology, no explanation, just an opening. I stared at it for a long time before responding. Then I typed about what her reply came quickly. Everything. I almost smiled at that because everything had never been something we actually talked about in that house. Everything had always been managed, filtered, adjusted. I didn't respond right away, not because I didn't know what to say, but because for the first time I understood something clearly. I didn't owe that conversation the urgency they were used to. 2 days later, I agreed to meet. A public place, neutral, a small cafe downtown. My mother arrived first. She looked the same, put together, composed, but there was something different in the way she held herself, less certain, maybe less in control of how the interaction would go. "Suddy," she said when I sat down. I nodded. "Mom, we didn't hug. We didn't pretend." That alone felt like progress. "I know things didn't happen the way they should have," she began. I didn't interrupt. "I want you to understand," she continued. "We weren't trying to hurt you." I met her eyes. I believe that I said, because I did. Intent and impact weren't always aligned. But that didn't erase the outcome. She hesitated like she wasn't expecting that answer. "We thought," she started, then stopped. "We thought you'd be fine." There it was. The justification, not malicious, just convenient. "I am fine," I said, and I meant it. "But that doesn't make what happened okay." She looked down at her hands. "I know," she said quietly. Silence settled between us, not tense, just honest. "For what it's worth," she added after a moment. "Your father, he thought he was protecting the structure of things, keeping everything stable." "Stable for who?" I asked. She didn't answer because she couldn't. We both knew the answer. "Are you agree?" she asked finally. I thought about it, then I shook my head. "Not in the way you think," I said. "I'm not trying to punish anyone." "Then what are you doing?" she asked. I leaned back slightly, considering the question. "I'm choosing what I'm part of," I said. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional, but it was clear. She nodded slowly like she understood, but also like she knew that understanding didn't automatically fix anything. "We'd like to be in your life," she said. "I know," I replied. Another pause and she asked. I held her gaze. "And that's something I'll decide over time," I said, "based on what changes and what doesn't." It wasn't a rejection, but it wasn't an invitation either. It was a boundary, and for the first time I didn't feel the need to soften it. We finished the conversation without resolution. No promises, no sudden reconciliation, just clarity. A month later, the first of the accounts transferred, then the second. Property documents followed. Each step was documented, verified, completed, not rushed, not hidden, exactly the way my grandfather would have wanted. I visited his house one last time before it officially became mine. Not to claim it, just to stand in it. The same den, the same couch, the same quiet that had once felt heavy but now felt different. I sat there for a while, letting the memory of those last weeks settle into something less sharp, less urgent, more understood. He hadn't left me everything because I needed it. He had left it because he trusted me with it. There was a difference, and I finally understood it. I never listened to the recording again. I didn't need to. What it gave me wasn't just proof. It was permission to see clearly, to act without hesitation, to step out of a version of family that depended on silence to function and into something that actually made sense. Not perfect, but honest. And as I locked the door behind me and walked back to my car, one thought stayed with me. Simple, steady, and finally mine. I didn't win because I fought harder. I won because I stopped accepting a version of the truth that was never meant for me. There's a quiet kind of clarity that comes when you realize the people closest to you made decisions without you and then expected you to accept the outcome without question. Not every betrayal looks like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like justification, like we thought you'd be fine, like decisions framed as protection when they were really about control. What matters isn't just what was taken or almost taken, but how you respond when you finally see it clearly. Setting boundaries isn't revenge. It's not about making someone else feel what you felt. It's about deciding what you will and won't participate in moving forward. And forgiveness, if it ever comes, doesn't mean restoring access to the same patterns that caused harm in the first place. If you've ever been told something was for the family but never quite felt right about it, you're not alone. Trust that instinct. It's often the first sign that something important is being overlooked or intentionally ignored. If this story resonated with you, share your perspective. Where are you watching from? What time is it where you are right now? I read more of these than you might think. And if you want more stories like this, stories about truth, boundaries, and finding your way back to something real, stay with the channel. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.